Looking dead in each other's eyes, Eiji witnessed his girlfriend wrapped around another man's arms. To her, he was once her childhood friend, clingy and annoying. But now she lies, claiming that he's nothing more than just an abusive boyfriend. A message pings on his phone from Miyuki. She apologizes since something came up with her club activities. Not wanting to make a fuss, or MC replies kindly, assuring her that it's fine and wishes her good luck. Introducing Aono Eiji, feeling a bit down since it was supposed to be their special birthday date. Miyuki Amada, his childhood friend, now girlfriend, had said yes when he confessed to her last Christmas. To Eiji, she's like someone from a dream, graceful and admired by everyone. If they hadn't grown up together, he doubts he'd ever have the courage to speak to her, let alone be dating her. It's been about 6 months since they became a couple. Still, they haven't kissed. Not because Miyuki isn't interested, but because Eiji is simply too shy to take that step. Still, Eiji never imagined she would actually blow off their very first date. But rather than let the disappointment ruin his day, he decided to take a walk to clear his mind. Eventually, his feet led him to the street where the movie theater stood, the one they were supposed to visit together. As he passed it, he imagined being inside with Miyuki, sitting close, with their hands gently intertwined. The daydream almost made him smile, but he quickly shook it off and continued walking through the crowd. His steps eventually brought him to the district he hadn't meant to visit, the Love Hotel area. Realizing where he was, Eiji froze, face flushed red with embarrassment. His imagination betrayed him again though. Just him and Miyuki, alone in a love hotel. He could almost feel her fingers tugging on the back of his shirt, pulling him closer. But snapping back to reality, he cursed himself for being such an idiot and turned to head back. That's when he heard them, the voices of a couple behind him, but one of them stopped him in his tracks. His eyes widened. That voice, it was Miyuki. There she was, arms wrapped around another guy. His heart sank. Stunned, Eiji called out to her, uncertain and shaken. Her eyes widened in shock when she saw him, and she stuttered his name. Both of them spoke at once, confused and demanding to know why the other was there. But things escalated too fast. Eiji grabbed onto her wrist in frustration, making her flinch, and her sideman wasn't about to let that slide. Swinging without hesitation, sucker punching him straight in the jaw, sending Eiji flying into a wall. Walking over, her new man snarled, asking what the hell he thought he was doing with his girl. But Eiji managed to mutter that she's the one who's cheating. Mocking him, her new man asked if he was serious, if he was some kind of stalker or something. Then he turned to Miyuki, urging her to say something as well. After all, she was just telling him how she dated Eiji out of pity, since he's her childhood friend. Or how about because he's boring? Even mentioning how gross his sweaty hands are when he touched her would be fine too. Eiji's voice trembled, calling out to her with a weak smile, desperately wanting her to deny it. But her new man wanted to watch him fall even further into despair, mentioning that that's what she tells him in bed anyway. Eiji's stomach turned. Horrified, he asked him to say it again. Miyuki's new man asked her to make a choice, either break up with him or Eiji. And in a moment of desperation, she calls out to him, begging him not to throw her away, since if he leaves her, she wouldn't be able to go on living. Eiji stood frozen, dead across his face, unable to say a word. But that silence was all the other guy needed. With a devilish smile, he placed his hands on her head, satisfied. Or so you'd think, but it wasn't enough for him. He needed to hear her say it, clearly and directly, to tell Eiji exactly what he means to her. Miyuki hesitated, but to her, he's just a childhood friend, an abusive ex. Her words hit him like a sledgehammer. But this guy wasn't finished. He wanted to utterly crush him. demanding that she says it again, looking him in the eyes this time. Miyuki turned to Eiji, whispering that she was sorry. She doesn't even want him to talk to her at school either. And with that, Eiji's world cracked. And from that day on, his once happy everyday life began to slowly fall apart. When Eiji finally made it back to his family restaurant, he opened the door and was greeted with warmth. To them, it just seemed like he'd come home a bit early. His mother cheerfully offered to make him lunch, but he wasn't in the mood. Without saying a word, he declined and walked straight to his room. Since then, he'd barely moved from bed. He spent his days staring at nothing, just waiting for time to pass. No matter how many times his mother came by with food, he just didn't eat. But it got even worse. He kept seeing it over and over. The same nightmare haunted him night after night. Miyuki lying in bed with another man, pouring her heart out to him. Her words echoed cruelly in his head. How clingy, disgusting, and pathetic Eiji had become. All he could do was stand there, a prisoner in his own dreams, helplessly watching, begging them to stop. Each time he jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat, it had gotten so bad, he became afraid to fall asleep. Still, he forced himself to get up. As he washed his face and got ready, he knew he couldn't hide forever. He had to go to school. His friend jumped up from behind, slinging his arms around his shoulder and asking casually if anything new had happened with Miyuki. Eiji laughed awkwardly, but then he saw her right in front of him, smiling as if nothing had ever happened. His mind flashed back to a memory. Miyuki had once asked if there was anyone he liked. Embarrassed, Eiji dodged the question, wondering why she would even ask. She said he never talked about that kind of stuff, then teased him, asking if she should just become his bride, but laughed it off quickly, saying she was only joking, while Eiji blushed and told her to cut it out. Back in the present, Eiji reached out towards her, desperate to touch something real, something familiar. Miyuki turned, noticing him right behind her. But before she could even say anything, someone stepped in front of her, demanding that he doesn't come near her again, calling him an abusive creep. Eiji froze, confused. He still didn't understand what was happening. Miyuki's friend grabbed Miyuki's arm and pulled her away from him, mentioning that if he kept on stalking her, she wouldn't allow him to get away with it. Shortly turning to Miyuki, gently consoling her while they walked away, leaving Eiji shattered, making it home in silence. Back in his room, he collapsed into bed, sinking deeper into despair. But then his phone buzzed, again and again, flooded with notifications. He checked the screen and noticed that the message was from an unknown account, reading, "Die, you're disgusting." And more kept coming, one after another. The voices in his head began to echo. Confused and panicked, he wondered what was happening. He didn't do anything. Then, overwhelmed, he hurled his phone across the room, all while more notifications came in. The next day, he didn't want to go to school, but he went anyway. As he reached for the classroom door, his hands trembled. He whispered to himself that it's just another normal day and slid the door open. The room was full of chatter, but everything felt muted to him. He sat down quietly, but soon enough, the whispers started again. The soft but unmistakable murmurs from yesterday now surrounded him. He whispers under his breath that he didn't do anything. But then a sharp voice cut through all the noise, telling him to shut the hell up, since Miyuki's friend thinks there's no way she'd lie. Apparently even Kondo, her new man from the soccer club, saw it himself. So it's two school celebrities against one freak. Anyone would know who to believe. Eiji sat there, sick to his stomach. He didn't even want to hear it anymore. Why, he thought, why did it all have to turn out like this? The world kept moving. Everyone else went on with their lives. Yet Eiji sat alone, eating lunch in silence. Just then, another message buzzed on his phone. This time, it was from his club. Practice was cancelled for the day, so there was no need for him to stop by. It had only been a few days, yet it felt like something had crumbled. There was no one left in his class he could rely on. Still, even though the club president had already mentioned the cancellation, Eiji decided to go anyway. Maybe someone would be there. Maybe he could talk to them, ask for help. But as he approached the clubroom door, he heard voices inside. They had lied. They'd cancelled it just to keep him away. His heart sank. He had worked so hard on a manuscript for them, pouring hours of effort into something he thought would bring them together, and they just threw it away. To them, he was nothing. Desperate, he thought of going to his homeroom teacher. Maybe she'd still be in the classroom. Maybe she'd listen. But as he neared the door, he heard yet another conversation. They had beaten him there, again, getting ahead of him. Since now, even his teacher was on board, having Miyuki's side. And just when he thought the day couldn't get any worse, he opened his locker and found a note inside, threatening him that if he went and snitched, they were going to the shop. Later that evening, he arrived home, drained. His mom glanced up from the kitchen, asking if there was no club today. But Eiji forced a smile and lied, saying they were cancelled last minute. She encouraged him to go lie down since he hadn't been feeling well lately. Eiji hated burdening them. Ever since his father passed, his mother never cried, not even once. She always smiled, always held things together. And his older brother, he stepped up, doing everything he could to protect the family and the restaurant in their father's place. Eiji smiled faintly. He couldn't fall apart. He had to endure this hell, even if it meant keeping the people he loved from being unhappy. Even if it broke him, then so be it. Elsewhere, Miyuki hadn't been sleeping well either. She tossed and turned, unable to stop thinking how everything spiraled out of control. Why did things have to turn out like this, she wondered. Why couldn't it all just be a dream? If Kondo hadn't been there that day, she might have run to Eiji. She might have told him she didn't want to break up, because the way he was being treated now, it almost brought her to tears. But she didn't get to cry. After all, she was the one who broke things. It all started as a harmless girl talk, silly conversations about love and relationships. She had been happy with Eiji, but things weren't progressing as she had wanted. Her friends misunderstood her doubts and assumed she wanted something more, something better. So they introduced her to Kondo. He was popular, charming, and experienced. Everything Eiji wasn't. She tried to decline at first, but Kondo was relentless and undeniably attractive to her. He carried himself with a sense of confidence Eiji didn't have. His compliments, his attention, it all slowly broke down her resistance. And then one day, they kissed. Everything she'd once wanted to give to Eiji, Kondo took. And then, they went too far. Lying in bed together, guilt crept into her chest. Taking the opportunity, Kondo consoles her, since this was all Eiji's fault. If he had made a move, she wouldn't have been there with him. To Kondo, she didn't do anything wrong. In his eyes, Eiji had failed as a man, and she wasn't to blame. But Kondo simply wrapped his arms around her and whispered that they should do it again. And while she might have felt guilty at first, there was also something else. A part of her that didn't want to stop. A part of her that liked it. And once she became dependent on Kondo emotionally, there was no going back. Not long after, Kondo casually mentioned to Miyuki that they could hang out since his club had a day off. She then stuttered, mentioning that the 30th was actually Eiji's birthday. But Kondo didn't care. He could always ask another girl instead. Miyuki clutched her bedsheets tightly, desperate for him to change his mind. But to him, it was always the same. She was still putting her man above him. It made him feel like an afterthought, and he was tired of chasing her. So he told her to end things with Eiji, so that they could both finally be happy. In her heart, she hoped Eiji would one day forgive her. At least, that's what she was banking on. She has spent over 10 years by his side, convinced she'd eventually marry him. But somewhere deep inside, the woman inside her whispered otherwise. She wanted to confess, to tell everyone she was the one who lied, the one who cheated, but she was too afraid. Afraid of losing everything she now had. The next day, Eiji opened its locker, only to have more death notes spill out. The rumors hadn't stopped. If anything, they had gotten worse. As he walked the halls, sleep-deprived and hollow, he opened his classroom door with heavy eyes, and then he saw it. Pasted on the wall, a photo of him and where he lived. They had taken it too far. Now even his family was in danger. Bursting the door wide open, he rushes out the classroom, but standing before him was the last person he wanted to see. No other than Kondo stood before him, asking him how it felt to be a criminal. Eiji had only one question for him. Why would he tell such a lie? His answer? Because it's fun, since losing his girl and everything else makes for a great show. He continues that it's Eiji's fault for thinking someone like him could get Miyuki, as well as how he should just drop out already, because he's not done yet. He absolutely loved wrecking people's lives. Defeated, Eiji fell to his knees. Everything had felt hopeless, and he had nothing left. As he closed his eyes, the world around him went dark. When he opened his eyes again, he was lying in the school's infirmary. The nurse looked over and gently said she'll inform his homeroom teacher. But Eiji didn't say much. It wouldn't have mattered anyway. No one was coming to help him. They'd all take Miyuki's side anyway. He couldn't even tell his mom or brother. Not after everything they had already gone through. Just one more year until graduation. But at the same time, how was he supposed to survive for that long? He decided to check his phone once more and froze. It was a message from the president of his club. Since after what he did to Miyuki, they've decided to kick him out of the club. It wasn't true. He hadn't done anything, but it was too late. One by one he realized all his friends had blocked him. Tears welled in his eyes and began to fall, until he had nothing left to cry out. Eventually, he stepped out of the infirmary, telling the nurse he was fine. He wandered the halls numb, making his way up a flight of stairs before stopping to sit alone. He thought to himself that he'd only need to get used to it. Eventually, his heart would go numb, so if he could just endure it, maybe he'd be okay. But the whispers returned, leaving him with no other choice but to think that maybe if he were to just jump, then maybe it would all go away. He found himself walking. The rooftop door creaked open, and there, standing in the breeze, was a girl, someone he'd never seen before. She turned towards him, softly, calmly, and just like that, in the moment when he thought there was no escape, everything began to change. The sunlight struck his eyes, and before him stood a breathtaking girl, demanding to know who exactly he was. And though he might have stuttered at first, Eiji explains that he's a second year who just so happened to be skipping class at the time. Because of course he couldn't just traumatize the poor girl by telling her he was about to jump off the roof. But she stares at him with patient eyes, as she tries to remember if she's heard of him before. Standing before us is Ichijo Ai. She's a brilliant girl who placed first in last year's entrance exam. Known for her kindness and beauty, she instantly became popular just shortly after enrolling. She's so popular, in fact, that she already had a bunch of guys confessing to her. Recognizing his name from before, she asked him why he decided to show up all of a sudden. And being confident that she's heard about his rumors, he kindly asked if he could have the roof all to himself, as he's just trying to hide out until their lunch break was over. But she's not budging. She had been there first and refused to give it up, requesting that he find someplace else. Eiji tries to convince her otherwise, since if someone were to see them together, it could be bad news for her as well. But she still doesn't care, and she's still not moving. Sure, she's heard about all the rumors, but to her, it's just a rumor after all. It's not like she saw it herself. Besides, romance is kind of like an illness to her. She has the common sense to know not to just believe in such a one-sided and vague story. But everyone else, on the other hand, would rather follow blindly and execute someone without giving them a fair trial. That's when Eiji wanted to know if maybe she had actually believed in him this whole time. But to her, it's not about believing or not, but simply that it's not right to go around hurting other people without hearing their side of the story first, as it's just too big of a risk. And I'm sure she never could have imagined just how much that single statement meant to him, as Eiji whispers a quiet but heartfelt thank you. But suddenly, without warning, the rain started to downpour. Left with no other choice, Eiji suggests they go inside. But to his shock, Ichijo refused. She wanted him to leave her alone, because after all this time, he still hadn't realized why she'd even come up there in the first place. She didn't care about catching a cold, as there was no tomorrow for her. And that's when it finally hit him that they'd both come here to jump. Reaching out his hand, Eiji broke the unspoken rule of never telling a girl to calm down. And what do you know, she crashes out even more. But Eiji couldn't just stand by and watch her hurt herself. Desperate, he grabbed her hand and pleaded with her to stop. It was in their struggle that he lost his footing, and they both slammed back into the fence. As they sat there soaked to the bone, Ichijo demanded to know why. Why was he trying so desperately to protect her? If that fence had been old or rusted, they would have fallen to their deaths. But Eiji didn't want to hear it. He didn't need a reason to save someone. And to be honest, you gotta give it to bro, because even while they're soaked from all this rain, he had to seal the deal. Because if she had plans to die, then at least she could go out with him. Hell, they could skip school altogether. And that's how you know it was effective. Look at all that blush on her face. Skipping school seemed unthinkable to her, but Eiji couldn't help it. They'd both come to the rooftop for the same reason, but he never imagined he'd be the one pulling someone away from the edge he'd meant to step over himself. And in that moment, Ichijo finally broke. She fell to her knees, tears mixing in with the rain, admitting through a sob that he was right. They laughed together then as the sun finally began to break through the clouds. When they stood, Eiji offered her his handkerchief so she could dry herself off. She hesitated at first but decided to accept it, asking shyly that he not stare. But bro's just like me for real. He couldn't help himself. And while she took a moment to dry off, she did one last glance up towards him and scolded him. With the rain finally over, she asked what they should do next. After all, he had just invited her to ditch school. Surely he had a plan, right? He confessed that he actually had no idea. He had just blurted it out in desperation. And for the first time that day, he realized she was smiling. He thought back to what people always said about Ichijo. The boy boys who confessed to her never stood a chance. Her first victim didn't even bother to get to know her. Another never thought about how she'd feel hearing a stranger's sudden confession. And the last one only cared about her looks and status. All three rejected and humiliated. But somehow she hadn't torn him apart for his reckless idea. Digging into her pocket, Ichijo pulled out her own handkerchief and shyly gave it to him. Eiji, flustered, accepted it, but couldn't resist trying to top her gesture. He rummaged through his bag and had found a rice ball he brought from home. Splitting it in two, he offered her half. And all it took was one bite. Man, you would have thought Noodle Ramsay himself made it. She tasted the tuna and mayonnaise, surprised by how good it was. As she explained, it was just a common filling from any convenience store. But she looked at him as if he had revealed some kind of secret treasure. Proof that there was still so many good things left to taste, to try, and to live for. Fired up by that thought, Ichijo's curiosity sparked again, and in that case, he figured why not invite her over to his place. They made their way towards the school's front gate, and from a distance, Eiji suggested they keep going, but Ichijo pointed out that the gate was locked. Eiji's plan was simple. Just climb over it. But that clearly wouldn't have worked since she was wearing a skirt. Luckily, he knew about a middle side door that could only be opened from the inside. And once you were out, there was no way for you to get back in. Ichijo wanted to know how he knew such a thing, but as an honor student, skipping school had clearly never crossed her mind. Eiji asked if it wouldn't be so bad to break the rules. Just this once. And taking her hand in his, he tugged her forward. His face flushed red when she asked why he was blushing, wondering if it was really okay to be holding hands with a boy she just only met, as it made her feel awkward. But then again, in movies this was normal, right? She told him shyly that this was her first time holding hands with a guy, so he'd better take care of it. He promised not to overthink it, and then, hand in hand, they sprinted towards the gate. A teacher's shout rang out behind them, but neither looked back, leaving behind the rain, the rooftop, and their broken pieces of yesterday. They ran forward together, towards something that might just be a future worth living for. She wondered why. Why is she trying to skip school with someone she just met? Even the words "I'll protect you," she's been told that so many times when she was being confessed to, and she didn't want to hear those words again because it would only trigger her trauma. But somehow, Aono was different. He's such a good person that it all just makes her worry. But if she's with him, then maybe she'd be able to escape this current hell. But someplace else, the man who ruined Aono's life, Kondo Seiji, thinks the whole world revolves around him. It turns out that his father is the city's councilman, and because of that, he was able to get into a high-ranking school without much effort. And since then, he was able to become the ace of the soccer team, all while carrying his pathetic team to nationals. Damn. Not only that, but he had also been scouted by soccer teams from some private universities. You see, since childhood, he found himself to be different from others, being smart, tall, and talented at football. So of course it was only natural he'd be popular with the ladies. Bro had been suffering from success so much that ever since the 3rd grade, he's never been single, but always had a girl around his arms. He'll never forget the time in 8th grade, the idol and the class otaku were dating, and with just one glance he knew they'd eventually end up marrying in the future. And that's when his hating ass knew that he had to end a perfectly fine relationship for no apparent reason. And as expected, she easily fell for him and got straight to dissing her man the otaku behind closed doors, since he's so gross, and how having him as a boyfriend was the greatest shame of her life. But Kondo saw right through her. She's nothing more than a foolish woman, acting like a damsel in distress. To him,
there's no such thing as a soulmate, and he thought what the idol had said was so hilarious that he wanted to play a recording of their conversation to the otaku. And that's when he fell into despair. He genuinely believed her promise to marry him, and it was in that moment that Kondo felt alive. He was so satisfied, like he felt great. And not before long, the idol had broken up with the otaku, choosing Kondo as her new partner. And since then, Kondo has grown to love the game of stealing other men's women. It seems like the girls who usually fall for Kondo tend to stop studying after a while, causing their grades to jump right off of a cliff. And eventually, he had grown so tired of her that right as he entered high school, he just dumped her. But she wasn't about to let go of him that easily. And from the look in bro's face, he don't give a damn. All while he tapped away on his phone. He wanted her to know that he really hates loose women, and how he began hating her after a while, so he wanted them to break up. Turns out in the end, the former class idol went from skipping school to calling it raps on life. But Kondo just watched and laughed as it all took place, since ruining both men and women's lives are incredibly fun to him. And his next target was none other than Miyuki. He had purposely grabbed onto her arm, twisting it, leaving a small bruise behind. And not long after, he approached two students and had them take pictures of it, sharing it all over Twitter, with the caption of saving this girl from her boyfriend, Aono. All while Kondo wonders how far Eiji could possibly fall. In the present, Miyuki noticed Eiji hasn't come back since leaving for the roof, and wonders if maybe he had quit school all because of her. She never once thought Kondo would go out of his way to spread such rumors, and apparently she had tried to convince herself that she didn't know anything, all while she delusionally thought to herself that it couldn't possibly be that bad. And it's in that moment that she caught a glimpse of Eiji running towards the school gate, and immediately beamed with gladness, but then noticed he was running with another woman, and get this, holding hands together. That happiness quickly turned into jealousy, as she wonders why and who that homewrecker of a woman could be. Oh hell nah. From a different perspective, a teacher watched as both Eiji and Ichijo made their grand escape, and sighs as he's just glad Eiji's safe, revealing Takayanagi sensei, Eiji's homeroom teacher. It seems like earlier that morning during homeroom, sensei couldn't help but notice Eiji had been missing from class, but decided he'd just take the attendance first. He walks down the rows, calling each student's name, and spots the marking on his desk, harsh words like die and get lost. He stopped for a moment to ask if anyone knew about Aono, with one student mentioning that Eiji did say he wasn't feeling well and went over to the nurse's office. And if that was the case, Sensei decided he'd go check up on Aono himself. And right as he opened their classroom door to leave, then came their school's nurse. There had been an urgent matter about Aono, and they couldn't find him anywhere. She even went as far as to blame herself for allowing him to leave the infirmary, since something about him seemed strange to her, even after he told her he just wasn't feeling well. And so, she insists on searching the school until she finds him. Meanwhile, Takayanagi sensei decided to have a word with the vice principal, but unfortunately, their head principal seems to be held up at some assembly. So in the meantime, he'll just have to ask the students in detail what happened. And that's exactly what he did, because as soon as he sat back down in class, his eyes carried a stare sharp enough to kill, asking if they knew what property damage was. And immediately the classroom fell silent. But since everyone's playing dumb, he mentions that he's talking about Aono's desk. Sure, he might not know who did it, but he's guessing from what's written along with Aono's condition, he has an idea what happened. He mentions how the desks are the school's property, so damaging that would be committing a crime. All while Miyuki sat there trembling in silence. They could use the excuse that it's all a prank or that it's Aono's fault, but writing slanders on someone's desk isn't allowed, especially since arrests have been made for death threats against celebrities. So there's no way they're getting out of this one. And while the class remains silent yet again, he places his hand down on his table, since this crime can't and won't be overlooked, and he needed them to remember that. About 30 minutes after Takayanagi sensei warns the class about bullying Aono, him and the other teachers sat together in the emergency conference room. While the principal apologized for being late, he bows before Takayanagi and thanks him for contacting them immediately, as nothing's more important than addressing this bad news. But Sensei sees it as a failure, since he wasn't able to manage his class in the first place. And honestly, all he could possibly do now is reflect on it. But as a teacher, there will always be things to reflect on, as their veteran teacher Iwai thinks he did everything he could, as there are plenty of people out there that would hide these kind of things to protect their reputation, and he's right. So now would be best to focus on the present and future rather than the past. The president wanted to know how Aono was doing after leaving school, and apparently Iwai sensei had already called his mom himself, asking if he was alright since he left feeling unwell. And thankfully, it seems he had made it home safely. And with that out of the way, their principal decided to share the policy he discussed with the vice principal. And their first order of business is to prioritize Aono, since if he ends up dropping out of school, everything will be lost. So they'll firmly support him during this time. Meanwhile, somewhere else, Kondo's on his phone texting his other hus, when two other students burst through the classroom door, reporting to Kondo that there was trouble. They wanted to punish Aono, so they ended up marking his desk. But now, Takayanagi was on their tail, and it seems Kondo might have had the wrong idea, as he always thought that depressing teacher was the type to cover things up. But still, it never really mattered to him, since even if this problem got too big, his pops would just deal with it anyway, and calmly responded, "I see." But such a response kinda felt a bit cold to them. After all, they did all of this for him, but he didn't ask them to do squat. And that's when the fear truly sunk in, because apparently all Kondo really did was share his worries with them. They're the ones who went ahead and spread those rumors like they were jokes. And not only that, but trashed the school's property as well. And once Buddy knew he was about to go to jail, he tried to explain his actions. But Kondo simply responded that he should deny it. Deny it with everything he got, since it's not like they have any hard evidence on them anyway. Plus, if they don't, they finna have to toot that booty up in prison. Hey, yo. And just like that, he got 2 more slaves under his belt. Meanwhile, elsewhere, tired and out of breath, Eiji asked if Ichijo was alright. But it seems she had a pretty tough time keeping up, especially since he had been running at full strength. But to him, just being able to keep up is amazing in and of itself. He heard that she had turned down every club that tried to recruit her. Yet at the same time, when she was asked to help out in sports, she'd somehow perform at the level of an ace. How she truly must have both brain and brawn. And as he recommends they continue, she stopped him, since she's now realizing how much he teases her, wondering if he was truly bad at explaining himself, or was it that he was doing it on purpose. And of course he'd say the first one, but she already saw right through him, and shortly after, they went on their way. It didn't take long for them to make it to Aono's family's restaurant, and as he walked in, his mom couldn't help but notice that he was home early. And well, let's just say he wasn't feeling well. But not only that, but his junior was also leaving early, so he wanted to invite her out to lunch. And his mom picked up right away. Like, did you just say you was skipping school with a girl? Not bad. You see, for a little context, Eiji Aono came to be because his late dad was a chef. He had trained at a really famous hotel to save on money, and when he fell in love with Eiji's mom, who helped him work the front desk, they opened a restaurant together. But now his older brother's the one in charge, while his mom handles all the accounting and waitressing. But back to the present, his mom lets him know that it'll get pretty busy soon, so they could use the break room to have lunch. And as Eiji thanks her, he opens the front door, letting Ichijo in. And she immediately pops her head out to peep and softly introduces herself and apologizes for the sudden visit. And both his mom and brother couldn't believe their eyes, but mostly his mom, since she could only stand there speechless. And as Ichijo tried to fill the silence, his mom quickly apologized, as she never thought Eiji would bring home such a cute girl. Like, he really impressed her. But with that, she tells him to go ahead and relax. It's while they went ahead and sat down that Ichijo got right to business, asking if Eiji had any recommendations on the menu. And without a doubt, he thinks she should go for their special and signature dish, the omelette rice. And just from the image alone, she already knew it was going to be delicious. And after making their order, he apologized for the room being so plain. But apparently, she actually doesn't seem to mind all that much, since neither her family's home nor their apartment has Japanese themed rooms. Turns out they're currently sitting in his mom's and brother's break room, so the space is filled with hobbies. And it all makes a lot of sense to Ichijo, since that's why the room has such a warm feel to it. And from a glance, his family seems really close to her, to the point she can't help but feel a bit jealous, as her family used to be that warm as well. But some time passes and Mrs. Aono places their orders and thanks them for waiting. But not only that, but after their meal, she's also offering both tea and coffee on the house. So it's whichever she would like. And as soon as Ichijo mentioned tea, they both had a moment to bond, as she's also really into tea herself. Which doesn't surprise Eiji in the slightest, as his mom had always been a tea lover. And as Mrs. Aono gets ready to leave yet again, she implores them to take their time, as she'll be back with the tea soon, and closes the door behind her. And as they both sat there together, they clasped their hands and dug right into their meal. And with each and every bite, Ichijo mutters that it's good. And it's a bit hard to believe that just a while ago they were both pretty much ready to end it all. She thinks the food is really delicious, especially the tanjiro. And apparently, it was all his dad's late special recipe, along with how his dad was always the type of father he could be proud of. She wonders if maybe she had misspoken and was being insensitive. But if anything, it all kind of feel like she's praising his father, and that just makes him really happy. Relieved, she couldn't help but mention that he must have been a kind father, as the Tanjiro tells her that much. And as he mentioned that he was glad to hear it, being able to get such a gentle food makes her feel really lucky, and is all kinda similar to an all-you-can-eat. But without warning, she asked if she deserved to live. Damn, that got dark really quick. Apparently, she's been agonizing over the thought this whole time. Even going up to the rooftop was a hard decision for her. And when she finally thought she had gathered the guts to do it, then came Eiji. She met him, and he risked even his own life to save her. And now she's sitting with him, eating delicious food. But even now, that resolve of hers is wavering. He knows he has no clue what's going on in her life, and he's sure he'll only say something irresponsible. But regardless, it was because she was there why he was saved. And as the tears welled up in her eyes, he softly whispered that he wanted her to live, as up until now, she had carried everything with dignity. But after seeing her break down in tears like this, Eiji felt like he was finally seeing the true side of the girl Ichijo Ai. Eiji's mom walks in the room, and apologized for the wait, placing down the tea Ichijo had ordered. And as she thanks her, Eiji couldn't help but think how it seems Ichijo has calmed down now. Apparently, the tea was recommended by his mom and was flavored with some wine, but it's particularly delicious when you add a drop of sugar. And it's as Ichijo took a sip that she couldn't help but think it tasted delicious. Not only that, but it smelled really nice too. It's then that his mom couldn't help but get real close and snug, asking Ichijo what her favorite kind of tea was, all while Eiji sits afar off, watching as they both get to know each other a little better. But his mom couldn't help but confess how happy it made her talking to Ichijo, how it felt as if she were her own daughter, and she'd love if they could be friends as well. It's as Ichijo stared patiently back at her that she shortly after began to blush and shouted sure. It's then that she stood to her feet, mentioning that she'll be heading out, and if that's the case, Eiji recommends he follows her out to the station, but she insists that she'll be fine. Since she'd been having such a great time with him lately, it would only make her feel lonelier later. And it's in that moment that Eiji couldn't help but turn away from her, but she reassures him that it's okay, since meeting him gave her a reason to keep on living. But then she ended up turning away from him as well, because now she had a question of her own, asking if maybe they were friends now. And as a smile grew across his face, he also reassured her that of course they were. And if that's the case, she wants him to keep looking after her from now on. It's shortly after walking home that Ichijo couldn't help but think how that might have been the happiest time of her life. But her smile quickly faded and her cheeks deepened in color as she wondered if just being friends would be fine. When suddenly, a car had driven right up to her as her chauffeur lets her know he came to pick her up. And that's when the light faded from her eyes, as she walked over to him and thanked him for coming. Back at Kitchen Aono, Eiji closes the door to his room, and the moment he exhaled, a jolt of terror surged through his body, and he could have sworn he was fine. But now he can't stop himself from trembling. He fell to the floor, wondering what he'd do starting tomorrow, and he can only imagine how horrible it's going to be. It was only because of Ichijo that he was able to forget the pain, and who would have thought she'd been the one to save him? When just then, he got a notification on his phone, and he figured it must have been someone else from his school trying to humiliate him. But then his eyes widened when he noticed a text from Imai Satoshi, apologizing as his phone had been broken while he was on the trip. And as he stared at the message, he remembered how close the three of them were: Miyuki, Satoshi, and himself. He sent a message back that he'll manage somehow. But Satoshi sent him a message shortly after, since he'd like them both to meet up at their usual family restaurant. And it's while he yet again stared at the message that he thought about all his clubmates, classmates, and everyone else who turned on him. But yet, Satoshi didn't seem to get it. He still treated him the way he always has, and that alone makes him really happy. And as Eiji sent a message back confirming their plans to meet, it was shortly after at the Kitchen Aono that we're introduced to Imai Satoshi. They both get to sitting down when Eiji couldn't help but realize how he had gotten there quick. And of course he would, since they're friends after all. He had heard that there were a few rumors going around, and he wanted to apologize to Eiji for not noticing how bad things had gotten. He had failed him as a friend, and wonders how he could ever forgive him. He doesn't really use social media, so he didn't realize the strange rumors spreading. And with his class splitting and his club trips being a thing, he hadn't found out about it until now. Yet, in the end, all he can offer are excuses, since the fact still remains that he wasn't there by his side when he was at his lowest. And as Satoshi began to raise his head, Eiji asked him why he chose to believe him. But Satoshi knew right from the jump that they were all just lies. A junior in his club had showed him the post, but Eiji Satoshi had never once laid hands on anyone, and he knew he wasn't the kind of person who would. Besides, the supposed person he'd be hurting would be Miyuki, so he knew this had to be some kind of mistake. Not only that, but Takayanagi sensei had also been pretty worried about Eiji as well, because when Satoshi had went to ask more about Eiji and where he was, they apparently mentioned that he had left earlier that day. And with all those rumors going around, Satoshi wasn't left to go off much, but he thanked them anyway, leaving him no other choice but to get information elsewhere. And once his target was acquired, he approached Takayanagi sensei in a desperate hurry. He heard that Aono had left early, and at this rate, if anyone's trying to cover something up about Eiji, he'd personally be the one to punch him. But shockingly, Takayanagi sensei had met his desperation, requesting that if Satoshi knew anything, even something small about what happened, he'd want him to tell him. As we all know, Takayanagi sensei had only grasped the situation that morning, so he's been digging around for information, but hasn't been able to find out anything. And if that's the case, Satoshi mentioned that he'll tell him everything he knows. And as he pulled out his phone, he showed sensei all the tweets that were going around online. And with that, Takayanagi wanted to know if it were possible for him to tell Aono something for him. He knows it may be scary, but he can rely on the adults to solve the problem. So even if it were just a little, he'd want him to believe in them. And who would have thought Takayanagi sensei was so passionate? And as Eiji sat there, his tears began to flow more freely than he ever could control. But meanwhile, running towards Eiji's family's restaurant, Miyuki pants as she desperately wants to apologize. And as she stood before Kitchen Aono's front door, she prepared herself to go in. Yo, it's your boy Noodles, and I hope y'all's day have been going well. Definitely let me know below in the comments. And while you're down there, you know what I'm saying, go ahead and like the video. But I hope y'all boys have been doing well, man, and I really tried to get this one out as quick as possible. But if you want more peak fiction, then check out right here. He finally snapped after being bullied every day. And I'll see you guys on the other side.